Welcome. So I'm delighted to introduce today's guest speaker for our Irish Studies seminars. So Dr. Brian Gurrin is joining us from Trinity. Brian is the Census and Population Specialist in the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland project based at Trinity. He's written extensively on census taking in Ireland, especially interested in regional population changes in the pre-famine period. He's previously lectured at the universities of Limerick and Maynooth, and his research includes Irish religious demographics, including he's co-authored this very substantial piece of research. I've managed to produce 2 copies of this very large volume on the table. Hope it doesn't collapse this afternoon. The Irish Religious Censuses of the 1760s, co-authored by Brian, Kerby, Miller, and Liam Kennedy, who of course is with us today as well. Published by the Irish Manuscripts Commission in 2022. And Brian is also a co-author, along with Liam, Don MacRaild and Lewis Darwen, of the Death Census of Black 47, Eyewitness Accounts of Ireland's Great Famine, very important and useful volume, pulling together particularly clerical, an investigation into clerical responses to the Great Famine in 1847, which was published by Anthem Press in 2023. And Brian's currently looking at the surviving statistics from the Census of Ireland of 1813 to 15. But his topic today is the mid 18th century operation that comprises the religious census of 1766, which arguably is Ireland's first census. So Brian, over to you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Now, I was introduced to the 1766 religious census of Ireland by a hero of mine, the very great historian and proud Belfast man, Professor Raymond Gillespie, while I was studying for an MA in local history at the University of Maynooth about a quarter of a century ago. I was immediately enthralled by this survey and continued to research it during my doctoral research into the early modern demographics of County Wicklow, which I undertook about 2 decades ago. Sadly, Professor Gillespie passed away some months ago, but the guidance and advice that I received from that very great historian has influenced my research into Irish demography ever since. Following the completion of my doctorate, I had the good fortune to be employed as a researcher on a religious demographics research project based here at Queen's, under the guidance of Professor Kerby Miller, then at the University of Missouri, and Professor Liam Kennedy of this parish, who I'm pleased to see here today. Our research into the religious demography of Ireland resulted in the publication by the Irish Manuscripts Commission in 2022 of this volume that Peter introduced, which I hope has brought this unique survey and its lesser companion, the religious census of 1764 to 1765, to a wider audience. My research with Professors Miller and Kennedy into Ireland's denominational demographic past continues to this day. Some months back, while speaking at a conference in Roscommon on the 1749 religious census of the Diocese of Elphin, I met with Professor Gillespie, who told me that he was in the process of reviewing our IMC volume, and I greatly look forward to reading his considered thoughts on our publication. And I'm sad that I'll never now get to see what he thought of our work. The religious census of Ireland of 1766 is one of the richest demographic sources available to the historical researcher for the period prior to the commencement of the statutory census series in 1813. Although most of the original returns were destroyed in the destruction of the Public Record Office in Dublin in 1922, 59 original items from it survived the fire, covering parts of Munster, Leinster, and Ulster. In addition, transcripts, extracts, and parish denominational numerical abstracts have survived for a great part of the island. Now, as Peter said, my current job sees me as the Census and Population Specialist on the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland project, a Government of Ireland funded project which aims to reconstruct, in a virtual sense, some of the records which were lost in the Public Record Office explosion and fire on the 30th of June 1922, in the earliest manoeuvres of the Irish Civil War. The project has 5 core partners: the National Archives Ireland, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, the National Archives UK, the Irish Manuscripts Commission, and the Library of Trinity College Dublin. And these institutions have provided us with resources, funding, advice, support, and expertise, and access to their collections. Beyond these 5 are many partners and supporting institutions too, and we've received wonderful support from upwards of 70 libraries, archives, and institutions around the world. Without the very welcome support that we've received, our project could not have proceeded in the fashion that it did to date, and we're most grateful to our partners for their assistance. The 1766 Religious Census of Ireland originated in a resolution of the Irish House of Lords, which I show here. It was issued on the 5th of March, 1766, and it called for the Church of Ireland parish clergy to return directly to the House of Lords a list of the several families or householders in their parishes, with the religion of each householder noted. It's important to note that the Lords merely sought that each householder be categorised either as Protestant or Papist. There was no requirement to distinguish between established church Protestants and members of the various dissenting Protestant communions. Note too that the unit of enumeration was not an individual person, but an individual household. This survey was a count of households, not of people. The ministers were also to list the names of any resident Catholic priests and friars in their parishes. And all of this information was to be returned to the House of Lords by the first Monday after the Easter parliamentary recess, which was the 5th of May, 1766. And with the passage of this resolution, the 1766 census was up and running. Now, this was a very tight time frame given the social circumstances in Ireland in the 1760s. In the short space of 62 days between the issuing of the resolution and the deadline for the receipt of the returns at the House of Lords, and that's less than 9 weeks, the requirements of the Lords had to be communicated from Dublin to the individual diocesan offices, whose clerks had to prepare individual letters of instruction for each parish. These letters then had to be posted to the individual ministers in their parishes, where the censuses were to be prepared and then posted back to Henry Baker Stern, the clerk of the House of Lords. And we remember that name because we might meet him again if we have time. And all of that was to be accomplished within the tight space of 62 days. Now, the 1766 religious census was hugely ambitious, but although the Lords had specified that a list of the names of every householder in every parish throughout Ireland was to be provided, not all ministers complied with the request. Some parishes failed to make any return at all, and other parishes, quite a number of them, merely provided numerical estimates of the total number of householders for each religious denomination without providing the list of names. Many of the returns were very basic, and we often have no way of knowing if these curt returns were mere casual estimates of denominational breakdowns or genuinely reflected confessional balances. This return for the parish of Armagh, one of the 59 surviving original returns, was signed by the Dean of Armagh, Benjamin Barrington, on the 1st of May, 1766. And Barrington's submission is a good example of one of the more unsatisfactory returns received. It provided no list of names as requested by the Lords, just the most basic population information. 2,536 households in total in the parish, with Catholics forming a marginal majority. If we suppose that a typical page would have held roughly 30 names, Barrington's return should have run to about 80 pages, but instead he simply returned this single page. And as for a return of the Catholic clergyman in his parish, well, that was, he decided, impracticable. So clearly Barrington, in spite of his high office within the established church, did not see merit in complying with the instruction from Richard Robinson, his Archbishop. Notably, Barrington lived at Loughlinstown in South County Dublin, which may have been the reason for his failure to comply with the Lord's requirement. Note also that Barrington's number for Protestant households did not make any distinction between established church and dissenting Protestants. And as we noted, making that distinction was not a requirement. But we'll get back to that issue later. Now, earlier I mentioned the religious demographics project that I worked on with Professors Kennedy and Miller. And during that project, we attempted to identify all the surviving traces from the census and to map them. And we produced a map similar to this. Parishes marked in gold and silver indicate original surviving returns. As you can see, most of the original surviving items that are available are for parts of Tipperary and Limerick in the south, and in Louth, Armagh and Tyrone in the northern half of the island. Parishes shaded in gold are original returns which contained lists of names as per the Lord's requirement, with silver-coloured parishes indicating original returns which provided numerical data only. Parishes marked in red are later transcripts which presented lists of names and still survive. And parishes marked in blue show transcripts which provide numerical, surviving transcripts which provide numerical information only. Unfortunately, we were unaware of any surviving data for swathes of Ireland. West of the River Shannon was a basket case with little or no surviving information for most of counties Kerry, Clare, Galway, Roscommon, Mayo and Sligo. And elsewhere we were aware of little surviving information for County Wexford. And in the Midlands, counties Meath and Westmeath were also largely vacant. Information is available for about 45% of the country. As you can see, Ulster is the best served of the provinces, with data surviving for most of the region, although most of the surviving returns, the surviving data, present numerical information only for Ulster. Now, during my research on the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland project, additional information has turned up in two collections. The Crossley papers in the National Archives Ireland and the Groves papers, the Tennyson Groves papers in Prony. And this map shows our understanding of the geographical distribution of surviving 1766 census returns today. I continue to research this field in the hope that more returns will show up, but I'm sorry to say that my gut feeling is that little additional information from the census remains to be uncovered. I doubt that many more of the white areas on the map will ever be filled in. Now, mapping the survival of the 1766 census material is a simple enough task. It's simply a matter of identifying material and adding to the map when new material is located. A long-term goal of mine, however, one that I harbored for 20 years, was to construct a map showing the coverage for the 1766 census at the time it was conducted, when the original returns were located in the Public Record Office before they were destroyed. And in the course of my research on the Virtual Treasury project, I came across this brief entry in the Crossley papers, Philip Crossley papers in the National Archives of Ireland, which tantalised. I was unsure of its import, but it seemed to be suggesting that there was, at one stage, an index to the parliamentary returns in the Public Record Office, which provided details on the 1766 religious census return for Burrishoole and Kilmina parishes in County Mayo. And crucially, it informed that the return for those parishes was a numbers-only return. Further digging provided additional tantalizing mentions of this unknown, to me at least, index to the parliamentary records. This was significant because, as we know, although the returns were largely destroyed in the Public Record Office fire, the various indexes to the destroyed collections were available for public consultation in the reading room of the Record Office, and although that building was damaged in the fire, it was not destroyed, meaning that, if we were lucky, the index might have actually survived. And to cut a long story short, and a many months pursuit short, after detours down many cul-de-sacs and dead ends, the hunt proved successful and the index to the parliamentary records were located. And this is volume 9 of the index to the parliamentary records, which, based on the small number of tantalizing entries that I'd come across, might contain a list of the returns received in response to the Lord's resolution of the 5th of March 1766. So let's have a look inside it. The discovery of the enormous 10-volume index to the parliamentary records, which has been carefully preserved in the National Archives of Ireland for the past 100 years, proved immensely valuable to us during our researches. Significantly, beyond recording the location, author, and date of each return for the 1766 census, the index also notes for each individual census return received whether the original returns contained the required list of names or simply provided raw denominational numbers. On the screen, you can see part of a page detailing some of the returns for the Diocese of Down. And here, the green rectangles indicate that returns of names were supplied as per the requirements of the House of Lords request. And the red rounded rectangles note returns that provided denominational numbers only. For some locations, the index is ambiguous, meaning that in a small number of cases, it has not yet been possible to figure out with certainty if parishes have complied with the Lord's request or had merely provided numerical responses. But these ambiguous listings were relatively few. Using the information in this index, our project, the Virtual Treasury project, was now able to plot a map to parish or parochial union level, showing the coverage of the 1766 census, the first time the geographic distribution of responses to the Lord's call was shown cartographically. And here's the map. Let me explain it. First, the index lists the returns received from all dioceses in the country, except for the Diocese of Meath, which I show here in green. Although the character of some of the returns from Meath are known from alternative sources, nothing is known about most of the 52 odd returns received from that diocese. No returns were received from areas shown in white. You can see that County Kerry in the south and parts of East County Limerick were particularly badly served by the survey. The parishes shown in dark blue are parishes from where only numerical returns were received. And some parishes shown in light blue, like down around County Cork, are parishes from where, parishes shown in light blue, like in Cork, are areas where the index is ambiguous, but my suspicion is that only numerical returns were returned from those locations. It's important to note that this map remains work in progress, and I continue to investigate these ambiguous issues to see if our knowledge for some of these areas can be firmed up. As you can see, rudimentary numerical responses were received from large areas of the country, including extensive areas across Ulster, North Leinster and Mid-Connacht, County Clare, down around in the southeast of the country, and the Mid-Leinster region. The block of territory running from the northern border of Meath Diocese to Donegal stands out in particular. Although there was a near 100 response rate to the Lord's call from this extensive area, and that I think is quite a remarkable achievement, and it was a remarkable achievement in itself, Most of the returns from this extensive block of territory were mere numerical responses only. Parishes shown in dark red are areas which complied with the Lord's resolution by providing lists of parishioners' names, which, as you can see, includes large areas of Mid-Ulster. Lighter red areas show areas which we believe complied with the list of names requirement. And this is the issue of ambiguity in the index again. We face notable difficulties with the Cork returns in particular, where we're not quite sure. There's a distinct geographical slant to the areas which complied with the Lord's specification for the list of names. The most extensive area, the area from which predominantly nominal responses were received, was from a contiguous block running from North Wicklow in the east to the North Kerry border in the west and southward through Cork to the southern coast. Other notable blocks of territory from which lists of names emerged can be seen in northern Connacht, East Galway, and an elongated north-south stretch running from the North Antrim coast through eastern Derry and Tyrone to West County Armagh. It's important to note that counties, the geographical entities with which many researchers are most familiar, can be somewhat misleading when viewing the character and content of the 1766 responses. This was, after all, an inquiry organised by ecclesiastics, with the information communicated from the House of Lords to the parish ministers via the diocesan network. Because of this, it is diocesan geographies which are of greater relevance to us, as the instructions from the individual dioceses regarding the scope of the census may have varied between the dioceses. It should be remembered that the instructions in the Lord's resolution is unimportant, because the ministers would not necessarily have seen that. What is important is the instructions which were communicated to them by the diocesan officials. This may account, for example, for the fact that most of the parishes in one diocese, Killala and Conry, up there in the northwest, for example, which covered parts of Sligo and Mayo, Killala and Conry returned a list of householders' names, most of the parishes there, while the area was surrounded by parishes in other dioceses, which were providing numerical responses only. Even within dioceses, it was often the case that contiguous parishes returned the same type of information. We can see this, for example, in parts of East Donegal and West Tyrone near Raphoe, up around just south of Derry, in Fermanagh, south of Lower Lough Erne, in areas proximate to Enniskillen town, and in parts of County Cavan. Why might this have occurred? Two possible reasons such concentrations of similar returns occur spring to my mind. First, it is possible that different clerks within the diocesan office were allocated specific geographic areas within the diocese and were communicating slightly different instructions to their allocated parishes. Or second, and I think more likely, perhaps following the receipt of the diocesan instruction, some ministers communicated with their neighbouring clerics to agree an appropriate response to the request. It's important to note, however, that although the diocesan instruction to the individual parishes is important, the content of only one of these instructions, that from the diocesan office of Down and Connor Diocese, is known to survive. As you can see, it was dated the 6th of March, 1766, the day following the Lord's resolution was issued, and it provided no qualifying instructions other than including a copy of the Lord's resolution, which I showed at the outset. Now, as we saw earlier, the return by Dean Barrington of Armagh did not provide the required list of householders' names, but many ministers did comply with the Lord's instruction, And some ministers went a step further, exceeding the requirements by providing additional information, such as ordering the list of names by townland, or even providing religion, age, or sex details for the people in each household. Long lists of names were received from many parishes, some of which recorded more than 1,000 inhabitants. And a small number of returns listed the names of all inhabitants, all people, not just the names of the householders, which had been the subject of the Lord's request. It is certain that some of the more detailed returns could only have been prepared following exhaustive door-to-door canvassing. Now, this return for our Trade parish, straddling the Derry-Tyrone border, another of the 59 surviving original responses, distinguished between established church Protestants, indicated by an E, and dissenting Protestants, PD, a distinction which was not required by the Lord's resolution. This return for Clonfecal parish in counties Armagh and Tyrone, another of the 59 original survivors, did not provide any nominal information, but it did present denominational numbers to townland level. An added boon is that some ministers, not content with providing demographic denominational information, seized the rare and possibly the unique opportunity to communicate directly with the seat of government by venting about social conditions in their area. Reverend Charles Humble from Killeshall Parish in County Tyrone complained bitterly about the conduct of his Presbyterian neighbours during the Hearts of Oak disturbances a few years earlier. His term, the spawn of Scottish Covenanters, is literally dripping with invective. Thomas Vesey, despite contemporary interdenominational rivalries, Thomas Vesey from Armoy Parish in North County Antrim spoke kindly words about his Catholic counterpart, a good kind of man. John White from Bow Parish in County Fermanagh did not share Vesey's sentiments, describing his Catholic neighbours as poor, low, illiterate people with diminished mental capacities. And John Wilson from Lettermockawarge Parish in West Donegal decried the impact of runaway emigration on the Protestant community in his remote parish. Numbers of families were forced of late years to flee to other kingdoms for shelter. In a few years, there will be few or none here to cultivate that religion for which our ancestors gloriously and virtually laid down their lives. Now, what can we do with the 1766 religious census and its data? The IMC volume, which Professors Kennedy and Miller and I compiled, presents an array of attractive colour county maps which show the religious breakdown to parish level. However, for the purpose of today's talk, I thought I might attempt to use the 1766 census data to examine denominational population change over a period of time. We must remain alive to the possibility that the data that we have available to us may be problematic, as pre-19th century demographic data can be notoriously unreliable. With this in mind, it's important that we see broadly consistent trends in neighbouring parishes and consistent regional trends or clumping of parishes with the same trends occurring in certain regions. If we start to see random patterns with no obvious regional trends, a chessboard type effect, then we are surely falling prey to poor quality data. In the first instance, a visitation of Clogher Diocese undertaken in 1733 and available in Prony provides useful early parish denominational numbers for much of the large diocese, which covers most of County Monaghan and parts of Fermanagh and Tyrone. It's often the case when undertaking temporal demographic comparisons that we find ourselves forced to compare statistical data which are not quite the same. One source might give us household counts, while the second may give us population numbers, for example. requiring us to apply conversion factors and introduce speculative assumptions to make the data sets reasonably comparable. In this instance, however, both the 1733 visitation denominational data and the 1766 census returns provided household numbers, allowing for a ready comparison. Note that my approach in this instance was to accept the numbers as they're presented without trying to adjust for accuracy. And this map of Clogher diocese shows the reputed movements in relative denominational strength across the diocese between 1733 and 1766. Right? Changes in the relative denominational strength. So it shows you which areas Protestants are increasing their proportion of the total population and which areas Catholics are increasing. Parishes shown in green indicate that no 1766 data or 1733 data are available. Some demographic trends are evident, however, though vague and somewhat inconsistent. Across the northern stretch of the diocese, the Catholic proportion of the population increased, in some cases by significant amounts. South of the Lough Erin's, however, the number of houses headed by Protestants appears to have advanced more rapidly than those headed by Catholics. In the southern part of the diocese, the less consistent pattern is evident, with Protestant numbers advancing more rapidly in Clontibrick parish, which is this one here, right? And in Kilmore and Drumsnat parishes, which are here in the middle of County Monaghan. But with Catholic growth more robust further south. Now, this pattern was unexpected. In particular, I had not anticipated observing robust growth in the Protestant households in the southern part of County Fermanagh, down here, this area. Although land was relatively plentiful in this thinly populated region. I was curious, however, to see if this demographic trend, unexpected to me, was maintained after 1766. Now, as many of you will know, the official government censuses commenced in Ireland in 1813, and a national census was held every 10 years from 1821 until 1911. But it was not until 1861 that a religious inquiry was formally introduced into the census. Examining denominational demographic fluctuations between 1766 and 1861, however, is too long a time frame, and too much happened in the century between those surveys, especially the elevated mortality during the famine and the birth of mass Catholic emigration. By good fortune, however, although no religious question was included in any pre-famine national census, other than 1766, of course, the returns compiled in 1831 were reworked some years after the event with religious data added. Comparing the statistical data from 1766 and 1831 is much more appropriate and presents us with far fewer challenges. One caveat, however, in most instances, our 1766 data are denominational household counts, while our 1831 data are denominational population counts. Although there's a close correlation between the two, they're not the same thing. Nonetheless, in the absence of any alternative comparative data, we have little choice but to proceed. So, Clogher diocese between 1766 and 1831. This map, it shows the changes in relative strength of the Protestant and Catholic communities between 1766 and 1871 and presents a completely different story to the one we saw for Clogher between 1733 and 1766. Here we see the Catholic proportion of the parish populations increasing between 1763 and 1831 throughout the diocese, with only a single parish in the immediate north, the parish of Temple Carn up at Lough Erin, bucking the trend. If the 1733 to 66 Protestant advance south of Lough Erin that we saw earlier was genuine, it appears to have been overturned as the 18th century progressed into the 19th. For the singular parish indicated by a red asterisk, right kind of there in the middle, that's Rossery Parish in County Fermanagh. For that parish, 1766 denomination of population figures survive, so population rather than household. So for this parish, our 1766 to 1831 denomination comparison is like for like. In all other instances, our comparison is between 1766 household numbers and 1831 population counts. Now, that's Clogher between 1766 and 1831, so I stuck it on a map of Ulster. The data for Clogher piqued my curiosity, and I wondered if we might find the stark changes in denominational balances within the diocese, a borderland between areas which had been the subject to plantation in the 17th century and areas which had not. I wondered if we might find those reflected elsewhere. I was interested in particular in the diocese of Raphoe, Donegal, as the parishes in the eastern part of the diocese running from Derry City to Ballyshannon and taking in the towns of Raphoe, St. Johnstone and Donegal Town had majority or strong minority Protestant communities in 1766, according to the returns. And the findings were, I feel, quite remarkable. In every parish in the diocese, the Protestant proportion of the population declined. That's not the Protestant population declined, it's the proportion of the population, the proportion of the total population declining, the percentage of Protestants falling. And in some instances, these declines were very large indeed. Two clusters where the decline was very significant are evident. In the southwest of the diocese, near Killybegs, and in the eastern part, near the towns of Raphoe, St. Johnstone and Letterkenny. A decline in the southwest might be anticipated, but the decline of Protestants' relative strength in the heartland of Protestant settlement in the county is very engaging. The impact of emigration, which as we saw had so worried John Wilson in his 1766 submission, may have been snipping away at the foundations of the strong Protestant community in East Donegal. And John Wilson is from that parish up there, Lettermuckle Ward, and it's got an asterisk, so that means that we have 1766 population figures rather than household figures. And just this parish down here is the parish of Bow, which was John White, who was talking about papists and their diminished mental capacity. Now, while Raphoe covers much of Donegal, it does not cover two eastern Donegal parishes and the Inishowen Peninsula up at the north, which are located in neighbouring Derry diocese. It seemed reasonable to suppose that trends evident in East Donegal would continue across the diocesan boundary. And sure enough, in East Donegal and South Tyrone, the trend of declining Protestant proportions of the parish populations was maintained. In all of Donegal, only one parish contained a Protestant population which increased its proportionate strength between 1766 and 1831 relative to changes in the Catholic community, and that parish being an island, that parish being the only island parish in the county, can reasonably be viewed as a special case, and that is that parish there, Inch Island in County Donegal, the only place where the Protestant proportion of the parish's population increased. However, a new trend now emerges with a band of parishes running through mid-County Derry from Strabane in the west to Dungiven in the central area and further east to Coleraine, where the Protestant communities consistently advanced more rapidly than the Catholic ones. It's regrettable that no 1766 census return was issued from Ahadoe Parish near Coleraine, that black one here, as it would have been useful to see if the trend was evident there too. Now, I decided to limit my examination to the west of the Bann region, but here I did put in but I included the bordering parishes in Down and Conor diocese to see if trends in in East Derry continued across the river, and to my mind they did. So these are these parishes here. They're down in Connor, but I just continued it across there to see if we were seeing a continuation of the trend. The most important diocese I felt to examine, I felt, was the Diocese of Armagh, as the demographics of the northern part of County Armagh are better known and understood than elsewhere. During the decades on either side of the opening of the 19th century, many Catholic families were driven from the North Armagh area through sectarian troubles. With this in mind, it's reasonable to propose that the Protestant parish populations in the broad North Armagh area should typically have increased in proportionate terms in the 65 years between 1766 and 1831. Although many other factors may have been impacting on demographic balances in the region, if we're to believe the historiography, then it is vital that we see a Protestant population which was improving its proportionate strength in the parishes between these years. In my view, the findings are exceptional. We see clustering effects in North Armagh and Mid Armagh and in neighbouring parishes of South Tyrone, precisely the pattern that we would have expected to see. In 3 contiguous North Armagh parishes, from east to west, Killyman here, Tartarahan and Drumcree, in those 3 contiguous parishes, the relative Protestant proportion of the population advanced by more than 10%. For Tartarahan parish, the middle one of the 3, Tartarahan is located immediately north of Loughgall parish, where the Orange Order was formed in 1795. The 1766 religious census recorded Catholic households accounting for 57% of all households. But by 1831, the Catholic population had declined to a mere 32%, a perfect denominational flip. The relative improvement in the Protestant position in Tartarahan parish was the largest in the entire province. No other parish came close to the Tartarahan statistic. Now, initially, I had entitled this map Denominational Change in West Ulster 1766 to 1831, but it seemed unconscionable to leave things like this. It was important to know if the improved Protestant position in North Armagh continued across the diocesan boundary into Dromore Diocese and across mid-County Down. I hoped that it would. It'd be a struggle to justify a scenario where the substantial improvements in relative demographic strength experienced by the Protestant communities in North Armagh halted at the diocesan border. That would leave me floundering for an explanation. Fortunately, there was no need for logic gymnastics, as I was heartened to see that Seago and Tullylish parishes in Northwest Down here, they complied with the regional pattern. And these are substantial increases or improvements in the Protestant position. Also, I note 3 contiguous parishes in the Northwest Down, Southeast Armagh, Antrim area, Moira, Maheralin and Ahalee. That's Moira, Maheralin and Ahalee. 3 parishes there, which exhibit the same pattern of more rapid growth within their Protestant communities than their Catholic numbers. Now, this seemed to me to be a reasonably stable place to park the study. We've constructed a simple view of the fluctuating denominational balances in an extensive region of Ulster. We see a Catholic population increasing at a more rapid rate than the corresponding Protestant population across large sections of the province, with the situation most critical for Protestants in County Donegal, as John Wilson had foreseen. In 2 or 3 locations, however, Protestant numbers had advanced more rapidly than Catholic numbers, with North Armagh standing out in particular. I felt tempted, however, by the Diocese of Kilmore, immediately south of Clogher. I was confident that the Clogher pattern of the relative denominational strength of Catholic advancing would be replicated there too. My expectation was that I would be viewing a diocese which was essentially covered in brown hues. So I was greatly surprised by an altogether more complex pattern emerging from this diocese, which straddles the border of the province of Ulster. Of greatest significance demographically are the bolstering of the Protestant communities in South Cavan near Baileyborough town, down here, and in Mid Cavan, and the comparatively rapid growth of Catholic numbers in North Cavan. At this stage, there seemed no point to leave the map like this. A push across the band seemed necessary to complete the task. Antrim and Down were the two counties in Ireland where the Catholic community was statistically the weakest, and Protestants outnumbered Catholics everywhere in the diocese, with the exception of isolated enclaves in the northeast of County Antrim, in the Randallstown area north of Lough Neagh, and in South Ards Peninsula and South Down. In 6 parishes, Bangor, Donaghadee and Tully-Nakill in County Down, and Kilrates, Templecarran and Island Magee in County Antrim, the 1766 census returns had reported no resident Catholic households at all. And in the 5 parishes in North Ards, Bangor, Donaghadee, Dundonald, Hollywood and Newton Ards, just 25 Catholic households were counted in 1766, compared to 2,605 Protestant households. The results for Down and Connor are enlightening. Earlier, we noticed 3 parishes in North Tremor where the growth in Protestant numbers exceeded Catholic growth. We now see that this trend did not stop at the diocesan border, but spilled across it into the Lagan Valley and along the east coast of Lough Neagh and through North Down to Lisburn and Derryahy or Dunmurry. Elsewhere in County Down, the Catholic numbers advanced more rapidly than the Protestants, not least in the east of the county near Ardglass and Downpatrick. This is Ardglass down here, on there. So the Catholic numbers are increasing more rapidly than Protestants down there. But Ardglass parish stands out as an outlier in that region. Its maritime and tourism heritage may explain this. Samuel Lewis described Ardglass as one of the most fashionable watering places in the north of Ireland. Further south along the coast, we note 3 parishes where the numerical situation for Protestants had improved in South Down, 3 pink parishes there. But unfortunately, no census return was received from Kilkeel parish down here. So we get Protestant advance down here, but Kilkeel parish is missing in 1766, which we would need in order to determine if we're looking at a regional trend there. It's important to remember that these shadings simply indicate improvements in the numerical state of one or other of the 2 broad religious communities in Ulster with respect to the other. They do not give any indication of the relative sizes of the 2 groupings. For example, in the 5 North Ards parishes referred to earlier, the Catholic community advanced from 1% of households in 1766 to 4.6% of the population in 1831. Catholics made up a tiny proportion of the population of the area in 1831, yet the 5 parishes are shaded brown to reflect this marginal improvement in the Catholic position there. Nonetheless, it seems incontrovertible that the Protestant community was struggling in many areas of Ulster, not least in the south and west of the province, and while it was more robust in the 3 eastern counties of Antrim, Armagh and Down, it was only in the Linen Triangle, the Lagan Valley and mid-county Derry where it appears to have demonstrated substantive growth in comparison to the Catholic resident population. The situation for the Catholic community of Ulster was quite different. In Donegal, growth among the Catholic community far exceeded Protestant growth rate, as they did in Fermanagh, Monaghan, Meath and South Tyrone and East Down. If we look at the changes across the diocese, in only one of the 6 dioceses did the proportionate strength of Protestants improve, and that's in Dunor diocese in West County Down. Elsewhere, even in Down and Connor, the relative strength of Catholics appears to have increased. It may be that some of these apparent increases are accounted for, at least in part, by undercounting of Catholic households in 1766. Any undercounting of Catholics with respect to Protestants in 1766 will operate to boost the percentage values shown here. Now, nonetheless, the declines are so significant, especially in the part of the province west of the Ban, that it's difficult to argue against these broad trends. That's a view of the religious the religious breakdown in Ulster in Ulster, in the Ulster region in 1766. So here you can see very strong Catholic or Protestant numbers in the east of the county and across North County Down, and more significant Catholic numbers, more significant Catholic populations in the south and the west of the project of the province. And if you superimpose a contemporary map of religious breakdowns in Northern Ireland, on top of that, you just see the consistent trend. So that's what you expect. Just have one more thing to say, and I'm going to wrap up quite quickly. I'm just going to speak quickly about this. We did say that the distinction that was required was between Protestants and Catholics. That's all the ministers had to do. But many ministers, particularly in the Ulster region, made a distinction within Protestant. They said this number of established church and this number of dissenting Protestants. 58 parishes in total made that distinction, distributed all around Ulster. I think it's really interesting. And if we look at the changing balances within those, the green areas there, the areas that are shown in green, are areas where the established Church of Ireland proportion of the Protestant population is increasing, and the pink areas are areas where the dissenting Protestants or dissenter areas are increasing. You can see that it's almost all established church. The dissenting Protestant population is declining as a proportion of the entire Protestant population in most areas. 12 areas are increasing for dissenting Protestants, and 42 parishes where the established church is increasing. That's just a trend, right? The dissenting Protestants are still the majority at both times, but that's the changing trend. You can see the established church going from a little over a quarter to about a third in that period. So that's the proportion of the Protestant population. And finally, that's our map. That's what we have. That's what we had, and that's what we have now. And one more time, just to finish off an interesting story. It is, to my mind, it's Ireland's first census. There's sufficient data in it to qualify as Ireland's first census, even though it wasn't a formal type government census in the way that we understand it today. But just an interesting vignette to finish off. There's our timeline. The 5th of March, 1766, it started. The deadline was for the 5th of May. The returns were to be addressed to Henry Baker Stern. On the 25th of April, 1766, the Dublin Courier contained a note to say that died a few days ago on his way to Bath, Henry Baker Stern, clerk of the House of Lords. He died before the deadline. So some of the returns, such as this one here, which is dated the 28th of April, was dated to a man who was already dead. So that's the religious census of Ireland. It is, to my mind, it is the great survey that was conducted, the great national survey that was conducted between the Down survey and the commencement of the census series. The more you look at it, the more it reveals. It is a masterful survey and one of the great surveys of 18th century Ireland. So thank you for your time.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks, Peter.
I'm sure there will be questions. So we have an audience online as well as in the room. So if you want, if you're online, just raise your hand digitally, and look, we'll pick that up and we'll ask you to ask a question. But start with people in the room. Yeah.
Thanks so much. That was really, really interesting. I was wondering if there was, if these returns were reported on in the newspapers or anything afterwards, either in the actual kind of summary or in reactions.
No, absolutely not. No mention of it in the newspapers at all. It doesn't get any mention in the newspapers. It would be super if it was, because that would be another source for surviving returns, but there's no mention of it. The returns came into the House of Lords. Henry Baker Stern was dead. A new clerk was appointed. He was tasked with collating the returns and ordering the returns. So the returns were all ordered. And then a volume was produced called the Book of Returns, where they transcribed, it's basically that, right, where they transcribed all the data, not the names, but the statistical data into this Book of Returns. and that book of returns was in the public record, was moved to the public record office and destroyed. So that is the closest that we have to the book of returns, but there was no mention of it at all. It was never mentioned at all. And there's one very interesting return for a parish called Newchapel in County Tipperary, and that's why I said that some of these returns were required door-to-door canvassing, because the minister said in that instance, he said the papists conceal their number of children from us because they fear that they're going to be taken away from us. So he was going around and making inquiries at the door. But yes, it's unfortunate there was no mention of it at all. It was.
And the ministers then had basically had connections to say, oh, we're completely outnumbered. I know they did in the census, but none of them kind of wrote pamphlets or anything afterwards.
Not that I'm aware of anything like that coming out in it. No. John.
There's some fascinating local variations there. But looking at 1733 and 1766, which always not in the middle, is 1741.
Yeah.
So where does that fit into the picture of change from 1733 and 1766?
Yeah, it may well be. I only looked at 1733 because, well, that was where I started with Clogher, and it's quite rare to have denominational figures for that area, and the Clogher 1766 data are so good in terms of, well, it's effectively, it is complete coverage for the diocese, and 1733 have very good coverage. So I thought it worthwhile looking at that. The famine was obviously impacting on that, and possibly, I suppose, well, yeah, possibly may have played some part maybe in the reduction in the Catholic proportion of the population up around the Fermanagh area. It's a possibility that might be feeding into it, but I think that there's just so little known and just so little scope for. I'm not sure how it progressed that study. You know, you can see that there was some form of regional impact, but I don't know how we would go and progress that other than looking at house counts in the from the hearth tax, but they're only available to county level, so it'll be quite unspecific. But
well, we are on the estimates are 1/8 of the population.
Yeah.
In 1741.
Yeah.
So it must have impact. Also, as far as you mentioned, Elfin 1749. Can you do anything comparing the Elfin data to?
Yeah. Unfortunately not, and the reason you can't do it is because Elfin. I did briefly mention it at the very start, but just in passing, Elfin is a wonderful census. It's a fantastic census, diocesan census, perhaps the best that was ever conducted, and complete survival for it and complete coverage for the diocese. The reason you can't do anything with it in comparison with 1766, if that's the question, is because there's almost nothing surviving from 1766 for Elfin. There's only one parish, which is a parish called a Hamlish in the very north of County Sligo. It's the most northerly parish in Elfin, where you have the two sets of data. You have the 1749 and 1766. So it would be very interesting to see what's happening there. But unless some 1766 returns turn up for Elfin, we're kind of goosed on that one. Yeah, it's a good question. Super.
Yeah. What prompted the decision in 1766 to take the census?
That's in all our searchings, we haven't come up with that answer. That's the one outstanding question that we haven't. We've speculated on it, and we've speculated in the volume, but there's no definitive indication on that. And it is interesting, though, that, you know, Scotland had been surveyed. I can't remember, was it in 1755 or so, had conducted a religious census, and then after that was 1766, and the following year Britain had a survey of papists, or their inquiry into papists, where they recorded the names of all Catholics throughout England and Wales. So perhaps this was inspiring work elsewhere, but yeah, it's a great question that we haven't managed yet to finally resolve, unfortunately.
Okay. Yes.
Just a question about people returning the census or not returning. Would there be any possibility that the people who returned it were potentially more ambitious and they wanted to be looked upon positively in central government, as it were?
That they wanted to be just
Well, looked on in terms of preferment.
possibly, possibly, yeah. There could be so many. I'll just pop back up that map again, just that's the map. That's the map of the returns, ignoring Meath. So you can see that the coverage is very, very good. Very little for down here. There could be various reasons. We don't know why ministers didn't make any returns for some of these areas. They may not have even received the letters if the diocesan officials weren't sufficiently organized. It's very unusual that no returns, essentially almost no returns, were received for County Kerry, for instance. So it may be that
to me, in a certain area, and there were no returns, the people who sort of got together and said, "Oh, we're not going to do this."
Yeah, there could be any number of reasons. That could be one of the reasons, but it would be most unusual, I would think, for ministers to meet and say, look, this is an instruction which has come through from Dublin, but we're just going to all decide to ignore it. But it could. We'd have no understanding of why returns didn't come in from certain areas.
I was just wondering, for instance, I said people are ambitious. Let's say if you have the names of the people who are supposed to send in, can their future careers be followed in some way? Did they?
I see what you mean. Yeah. That's an interesting.
Not. I mean, who knows? And maybe something with age. Who knows?
I don't think there was any follow-up, because like the Lords had asked for a list of names. This is what came in. So all those blue parishes there, the parishes shown in blue, weren't bothering to send the list of names, but they weren't contacted again to say, where's your list? You just gave us two numerical figures. So there was no follow-up in terms of that. It's mid 18th century. It's not got into the 19th century when census taking was more formalized. I do think the Lords were surprised at how successful it was, because it's quite remarkable in the space of 9 weeks that you got like that coverage of the island. If you take the Diocese of Meath, exclude Meath, there's 83% geographic coverage from this, and that was all achieved in the space of 9 weeks. It's quite a remarkable response rate.
Well, they actually posted it.
Yeah, they were posted in. Yeah, like that's a postmark there on that one there. That's just the postmark, and that's the postal stamp there. So they were all coming in the post into Parliament Building in College Green.
Any questions online? Yeah. So, is it possible to put the 1766 to 1831 changes in religious
for Ulster?
Yeah, for Ulster, back up again. So, I'm just thinking about the potential causes for religious change. I mean, obviously, in the case of North Armagh, you mentioned sectarian conflicts. That's widely attributed in other sources. I know Liam and Kerby wrote about the parish of Moira, and to explain the significant dissenter decline in that parish in that period, and suggest kind of significant differential immigration rates, which may be playing a role kind of more generally in East Ulster. I suppose you've got kind of a significantly higher cotier labourer birth rate, attributed from other sources, probably explain that's differential Catholic rate. I'm interested what's going on down here in East Cavan.
Yeah.
This area this is the King's Court area where Protestant.
That's the one that we don't have the data for. So you can't see if that tendency is falling across the diocesan border, which, well, I presume it might be. But that could well be impacting there. So while you expect clumping of parishes and you expect the same colours popping up, and you see that like classically in North Armagh, other parishes could be having very specific You know, you see, you don't always have to get clumping. That's why you might get something like this here, where one parish is the Protestant proportion is increasing, or the number of the proportion of the Protestant population is increasing more rapidly, and there might be special cases. Each one of those really require local historians or people with local knowledge to get down and get into the data.
So I'm not quite
And
sure,
then
I'm
you
not quite sure where the Farnham estates are there, but of course, I mean, there is a lot of suggestion that Farnham is deliberately increasing the number of Protestant tenants he has on his estate in the early decades of the century.
But there's no evidence of that because this is Kerby Mana here.
That would be in Cavan.
Oh, Farnham, yes, yeah.
Well, I'm not quite sure how it fits. Okay, yes.
There's nobody reacting to these figures. There's no sort of political reaction to be found to any of this. But I mean, I'm curious because these issues of counting religious numbers actually are quite sufficiently sensitive, certainly in England and Wales. There was resistance to having questions about religion in the English and Welsh census.
Yes.
You know, there's that. At what point do these issues acquire political sensitivity?
Well, most of these, like when I said that some ministers conducted door-to-door inquiries, probably not that many. In most cases, the ministers would have been compiling these lists, and it wouldn't have been known to anyone that it was occurring. So the census would have been, they would have sent in their list of names or their numerical figures, and nobody would have, the parishioners or the locals wouldn't have known that it was happening. There was no reporting, as we said, in the newspaper, so most people wouldn't have known that this census was even taken. It's not like when you get to the 19th century, when you get to 1813 and you get the barony constables calling from house to house to house making inquiries. Any return that the minister decided to submit, or however the minister decided to submit the return, was just accepted. It was accepted into the House of Lords, and there was no further inquiries made as to whether the figures were accurate. There was no inquiry as to why the minister hadn't complied by providing the list of names that were required. They were just came into the House of Lords, and then they were compiled into the Book of Returns, and that was as far as it went. So nobody knew that this was even being conducted, except for the people where the canvass census was taken, where the minister arrived at the door and asked how many people are living in the house, and so on.
Yeah, we have a question online from Kieran McCabe. Thanks, Brian, for a great paper. The IMC volume is an impressive piece of work. Can Brian say a few words about the actual collection of data by the three editors over, I imagine, many, many years?
Do you want to say anything, Liam? Or
no, it's your show, Brian.
Well, yeah, how we went about it, we were aware initially of the 59 original returns. I had worked on the 59 original surviving returns when I was doing my doctoral researches. So, and I had transcribed all of those by hand. But when we got into this, we were aware of various collections and various sources, particularly among the Tennyson Groves papers, where the data was, where Groves had transcribed, in some cases, the entire list of names, in some cases, the list of Protestant names, and in other cases where he had just taken the numerical abstracts. And what we did when we were compiling the book was we searched for as much data as we could find, and as that book contains about 99% of the surviving data that I'm aware of. Compiled the data, and then we also we didn't just provide the numerical statistics in it. Now that book contains numerical statistics. It doesn't provide lists of names where they survive, but we do reference them in all instances or in all cases to point researchers to where they can be accessed. But we did also work out the proportionate distribution of the population between Protestants and Catholics, where dissenting Protestant figures were available. They were all prepared they were all presented as well. So, and we also tried to present small little textual descriptions of the returns, or provided qualifications, or provided information that we were aware of about problems with the returns or anything like that. So basically what we tried to do was provide in a kind of a formal, we've tried to present the information for 1766 in the fashion or somewhat mirrored on the standard 19th century census reports that were published, but provide additional information around them as well. So if you are working with statistics, we've tried to provide some explanation as to the strengths and weaknesses of the statistics and any issues with boundary changes and so on that we're aware of.
So if this was a 19th century survey,
Yep.
your data would come in, it would be compiled and printed in a parliamentary paper, which would be then presented to Parliament, usually stimulating a debate.
Mm-hmm.
There's no evidence of any compilation at the parliamentary level of this information, apart from the index that you spoke about earlier. No evidence of a debate around it.
No. Well, the data was the statistical information was compiled into this book of returns.
Yes.
The book of returns then was filed in with the parliamentary papers, and we have no evidence that anything was done with that from a political point of view or anything like that the numbers were fed in. Now, they may have been, but I'm not too sure that they were. I doubt that they were. The Lords were very impressed with the response rate from the survey, because they did meet to have a look at the returns. There was a meeting where they just had a look at the returns, and there were over 800 responses bundled up in paper. So it must have looked quite impressive when they were introduced to the returns in the House of Lords. But after that, after the book of returns was compiled, it went in with the parliamentary records, and the only person who I know or who I'm aware of accessed that book of returns was Edward Wakefield when he was compiling his statistical account of Ireland in the 1810s or so. He does make a note. He provides the diocesan listing and the diocesan statistics, and he says, I got these from the book of returns in the parliamentary records, which were then in Anglesey Street in Dublin, right beside near College Green. And he said that the book comprises 200 odd pages, large pages of data. It's too voluminous to replicate here, so I'm providing these diocesan figures, and that is for instance, and that is the only reason that I said earlier on that for Meath diocese, I said we do know some Meath statistics, but there were 52 returns, because Wakefield is the one who tells us. So other than that, we wouldn't have even known how many returns there were. So yes, Wakefield is the only person whom I have ever seen referencing this book of returns. He did note, it was interesting to note that he did say that it took quite a lot of time for the clerks in the record office in Anglesey Street to find the book for him. He knew it was there, and they had to do quite a lot of searching. So that gives us some idea of what the record office in Anglesey Street was like before the Record Commission was established. So those returns were moved from the House of Lords when the Parliament closed down. They were moved from the House of Lords to this house in Anglesey Street, 35 Anglesey Street, where they were stored for a couple of years until the Record Commission was set up. Then they were moved from Anglesey Street to the Record Commission offices in Dublin Castle and the Record Tower in Dublin Castle, and they were retained in Dublin Castle until the Public Record Office was set up in the 1860s, and then they were moved with all the parliamentary records into the Public Record Office, where they remained from the 1860s until 1922. And an interesting point, why does so much survive from 1766 compared to, say, the 19th century censuses? Well, the records that were in the Record Office were public records, so they were open to the public, but you had to pay if you wanted to access records that were post 1820. So the 1821 census, for instance, you had to pay to access that, whereas records pre-1820 were available to research for free. So that may well be quite one of the reasons why so much survives from 1766, because it was free to access.
Yes.
You mentioned, I think you mentioned other censuses were done in other places. Yes, is that right?
Oh, well, there are many censuses, and there was a well.
Wales,
Oh, Wales, yeah. This was the returns of papists in 1767. The following year, the returns of papists, where the names of Catholics in England and Wales were to be recorded, and they're published as well. They're available probably.
Did they do, sorry, did they do anything more with their census than we obviously, some of the language is flying, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, even for us. Did the Lake of Wales or whoever else, did they do more with their census than was done with ours?
I'm not entirely sure on that. I think that it's probably more likely that they would have fed into political decisions in England and Wales, because they conducted a number of these returns of papists, or these Catholic inquiries in 1767 and maybe in 1780s, I think maybe 1783 or so. So they were conducting them on a kind of a more regular scale than in Ireland. So they may have. But
would that have meant anything? Excuse my ignorance here, this is not my area of specialty. Would that have meant anything for them if there was a little more papists than there was the other ones, whatever they're called?
Probably wanted to keep an eye on things and just keep an eye on potential trouble from areas where Catholics were strong. This is in England now we're talking about, is it? Yeah, probably something like that.
Wales as well, would that have been an issue?
Yeah, but I think Wales was, the numbers weren't great. If you think about England, the main area for Catholic settlement in England was around Liverpool. And they were Irish people going across. If you look through the lists of names in the returns of papists of 1767, there's so many names that are obviously Irish people going across into Liverpool. But this, as I said, this is one of the great surveys. There was another survey previous to this in 1764-65. It wasn't as successful. It was conducted by the hearth tax collectors, and that's also covered in the volume there. So 1766 was by far the most successful survey, religious survey in Ireland on a nationwide scale, like with 83%. That 83% coverage was even greater than the coverage from the first official Irish census, the statutory census, which covered about 80% of the country. So that was even more successful than that, and that was all organised in the space of 9 weeks.
83% sounds good to us.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah. But also about 99% for Ulster. It's almost complete coverage for Ulster there. There's only those black areas there are areas that are vacant for Ulster. We have data for every single parish elsewhere in Ulster.
Good. Luke, another one.
Yeah, one more from Sadie Sunderland. Thank you for a great paper, fascinating stuff. I find it very interesting that there was not really a reaction to or utilization of the census at the time. I wonder if you could speak more on if there were indications as to specific reasons why it was carried out in the first place. Is there any discussions of that in the records, or was it just you gathered data?
That's the same question as there. I haven't come across any reason for it to be conducted. Look, there was another survey, a religious survey conducted in Ireland, similar, but it wasn't as good as this. There was a national religious census conducted in the 1730s. So the 1730s was kind of a generation into the penal laws at this stage. This is about 2 generations into it. Things were changing in Ireland by this stage. Catholic numbers were clearly very strong. Catholics were becoming more, some Catholics were becoming more wealthy, more involved in the economic life of the country. Maybe this was just a reflection that Catholics couldn't be excluded, and within a couple of years you start seeing the Bogland Act, and you start seeing the removal of penal laws. So maybe it did have an effect into recognizing that the exclusion of Catholics, the formal exclusion of Catholics, just can't go on any longer, because Catholics were clearly so dominant in throughout most of Ireland except for Ulster.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much. To follow up, of course, I mean, there is in the library, we'll have copies of the book, The Irish Religious Censuses. of the 1760s, co-edited by Brian Kerby, Miller, and Liam Kennedy. A lot of this material will be coming out on the virtual Record Treasury of Ireland website, which will be free access. But how much of it is there already?
I will say that all of the original returns are available to examine on the virtual Record Treasury of Ireland website, and the entire structure of the 1766 returns, every single return that we know about, except the Diocese of Meath, which is a problematic one, but every single return is outlined and described and interpreted and so on, all available on the virtual Treasury of Ireland website. If you go onto the virtual Record Treasury of Ireland website, it's one of the research areas that we were most successful with during phase 2 of our project. So it became what is known as what we term a gold seam, where we've reconstructed a very significant selection of the segment or section of the collection. So if you go on to the gold seams on the virtual Treasury of Ireland website, select 1766 census, you will see the entire set of returns outlined by diocese, and it's very interesting. And there are a number of essays up there about what happened to returns, and how to interpret the returns and so on. So it's well worth. I did a lot of it, but I do think that it is well worth having a look at. I think it's worthwhile if you have a half an hour to spare.
Great recommendation. So can we finish by thanking Brian?
Thank you very much.
And just before people go, we have a seminar next week. It'll be on Tuesday, as Monday's a bank holiday. So Tuesday, the 7th of May. It's Rachel Young, who's our visiting Boston College scholar for this year. And Rachel will be speaking about her research on community murals in Belfast and Brixton in the 1980s. So you're very welcome to come along to that event. That's next Tuesday at 4:30. Okay, thank you.